Hello, everyone. Welcome to Oudolf Garden Detroit. I'm Meredith Simpson. I will be sharing tonight about the native meadows portion of the garden. And just a couple things here before we get started. Please mute yourself and stay muted during the conversation, during the presentation. We can unmute at the end if we want to do questions that way. That way we won't have interruptions, etc. It's so great to see so many of our volunteers here. Wonderful to see you all. And I think here in just a moment, we'll get started. So there's a simple chat feature in Ring Central. We're talking about some of our favorite native plants. If you'd like to post your favorite native plant in there and tell us why while we wait. And that's the place to put your questions as well, of course. So just along the bottom of your screen there, be sure and stay muted during the presentation, and I'll get started. I'm going to turn off my video during the conversation, just so you can see all the pretty pictures we have. All right, so let's get started. So again, welcome. I'm so excited to speak tonight about the native meadows at Oudolf Garden Detroit. It's been an incredible project, and we planted the meadows last year, as many of you know. So I'm thrilled to be talking about it this evening with you. Just a quick note, if anyone is a member of Wild One's North Oakland chapter, I was asked to give a presentation on the native meadows on Wednesday evening this week. So grab yourself a glass of wine and go enjoy your favorite TV show instead this evening. I'll see you Wednesday. So let's dig in on the native meadows. So here we have a beautiful overhead drone shot of Oudolf Garden Detroit pretty much in its entirety. And we can see on the bottom portion of the screen, on the Canada side, on the lower area, is our west meadow and our east meadow. The west meadow is smaller and has a large delineated wetland in it, which we'll talk about. And the east meadow is a good bit larger. So that's kind of the very creative names we've given these two different planting palettes and two different areas that unite in the center in front of the bell tower. So just to get started, the Native Meadows team, here we see in our photo, Piet Oudolf, our wonderful Dutch designer, Shannon Gibb Randall, our landscape architect from Insight Design Studio, and her colleague, Susan Noblet, has also been an integral part of the Native Meadows and, in fact, the entire Oudolf Garden Detroit from the beginning. We're also joined on the Native Meadows team by a contractor called Natural Community Services. They provide restoration services and advice, and also invasive species management, which we will talk about, led by John Delisle. And we have our wonderful all-volunteer grounds crew. Several of us over several years have been working hard on this project. And of course, our amazing volunteers. Without all of you volunteers who helped us plant the native meadow and who will help care for it, it wouldn't be possible. So this was an early photo taken on Flynn Pavilion in Belle Isle as we were beginning the planning process actually for the whole garden. And very early on, before Pete got started with any design work, Shannon and Susan did a site analysis. And this is the exact report that they gave us, a graphic. And Shannon's work is basically informed all of her work, all of the work that she does at Insight Design Studio by what is the land trying to tell you? What is the soil like? What used to be planted here before? What would have thrived here? What is this landform all about? So they did a wonderful site analysis for us, looking at prevailing winds. Of course, we're basically a full sun garden. We have very little shade. But in particular importance for the native meadow, down at the bottom of the screen here in sort of this pale green, You can see we have mesic clay soils. Heavy clay, mesic refers to a wetter environment. And of course, on Belle Isle, we have water everywhere. So it's really important to understand what is the water doing, where is it, and that completely has informed our entire planning process for the native meadows, because this is a native wet meadow. This is a very wet area. So of course, we're adjacent to Lake Tacoma, and we sit in the middle of the Detroit River. So we have water under us, around us, everywhere. This down here along the bottom, this kind of speckly looking thing is our delineated wetland that was protected all during construction, of course, and we have not touched the wetland itself. And you can also see, it's important to note the swales that they noted. This is the natural way that water would drain after, rainstorms, et cetera, and as the spring thaw comes on. So all of the water in the garden is heading down into the meadows. So we know we're dealing with heavy, wet soils. We have some beautiful old trees on the east side over here. A couple of the slippery elm, of course. And at the beginning of the project, the pin oaks were rather chlorotic. They're very, very healthy now, which is wonderful. So just to set the stage here, this site on Belle Isle, and now we've reversed our view and we're facing Canada. This is right as we were beginning construction for the entire garden back in March of 2020. And about half of the site is included in the 100-year floodplain. So when you are working in a floodplain, you have to be very mindful with your permitting, et cetera, of what are you doing with cut and fill, et cetera, of land mass, of soil, et cetera, because you can't offset the flooding to your neighbors, so to speak. So we actually, because we were raising the garden up, because we had extensive flooding in 2019 and 2020 on the island, the Great Lakes were at an all-time high. We were raising the main garden beds up, which would be in the bottom of the screen here. So we can see here that all of the East Meadow, we scraped the topsoil off of that. That was our compensatory cut for the fill that we were adding on the northern portion of the site. So we've scraped this topsoil. It was really good quality topsoil. We've pulled it over to the side and we're using it in the garden soil process. Nothing went to waste. It was just that it was scraped and disrupted over there. And we can see the wet meadow intact on the right. The west meadow. So a quick timeline here. Of course, in 2020, we planted the main beds. And just a reminder to please keep your audio muted. Make sure you're muted so that we don't, I can hear some background here noise. So in 2020, the main garden was planted. In 2021, because of that compensatory cut, we had bare soil in the East Meadow. We did an annual rye seeding to help stabilize that soil, improve the soil, and sort of hold it for the season until we got a plan together with what we were doing. We also did with the team, with Insight, with Pete Oudolf, and with Natural Community Services, we did a survey and inventory of what's growing down there already. What are the conditions like? 2022, we did a sedge and rush seeding, which we will talk about, and we began our design process. 2023, we were finishing the design. We were working on extensive permitting, our contractor selection, et cetera. And we were planning the boardwalk, which hopefully many visitors have now seen. And then last year in 2024, in April, we worked with Anglin Civil again to build our wonderful boardwalk in the East Meadow. We did 3 plantings by hydrology zone, which we're going to go over this evening. And Richard and I, at the end of the year, got wildflower seed from Michigan Wildflower Farm and seeded in flowering species into that disturbance zone where the boardwalk was constructed. This year, we're going to be doing lots of care and maintenance of the meadows, and next year we will be planting our perennial grass species, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. Caveat all along, we have ongoing management of invasive species. Primarily, we have some annual grass, invasive grasses that we handle with cutting. We also, of course, deal with Phragmites and purple loosestrife. So we took our time at the beginning of this project to get a handle on those two problem plants, especially very carefully with proper permitting and everything. So here we can see again that water everywhere on the site. And with this drone imagery, we're able to see where we have standing water in fall, even in early fall here. On the right-hand side, we can see the beautiful wetland going dormant and the entire garden from above. So speaking of that water, one of the key things that our team did from the beginning, Duncan and Sean and Chuck in particular, is we were doing overhead drone, high resolution drone photography to track what the water is doing in the native meadows. We needed to know where are we going to have standing water and for how long. Because sometimes it stays wet all season. Sometimes it's for weeks or months, or sometimes it goes dry. But we really needed to understand that to inform our plant palette. So here we have late March in 2022, and we're starting to define some of those zones. We can see about 6 weeks later that the East Meadow is drying in that particular year. We can see how it's drying down, and you can still see wet soil at the surface. We can see standing water, but we can still see wet soil from these awesome drone images. And here again, end of June, the same year, that year, this area dried pretty well at the surface. And we can see that there's not a lot of plant material dealing with those. There's not a lot of existing plant material dealing with that. Those levels of water. That's a difficult condition to grow in if you're not already accustomed to it. So that really informed our plant palette that we were looking at. Here again I think this was kind of high summer one year. So it really varies. We can see we still have standing water in this shot in the East Meadow. And we can see the darker green on the right-hand side of the screen of that delineated wetland. Those are primarily various rushes that you see in a nice, healthy wetland. So here we are getting ready with our planning process, our design process, and Shannon and Susan at Insight compiled all of this information together into a wet meadow analysis report that we got started with. So the team was tracking those hydrology zones, which we can see here in various areas in purple and blue, and indicating undisturbed areas, highly disturbed areas. You know, there is a seed bank here. This land has memory and has seeds in the soil, and we've started to see those a lot over the last few years and really learn from them. So this is, and you know, there's some interesting caveats. We are kind of mowing an area around the fence of the Carillon so that folks can have access to see the meadows from all different areas, and also leaving that area around the Carillon fence open in case someday someone steps forward and wants to work on restoration of the Carillon. So we're mindful of that. Part of that initial survey included what is already growing there. So remember, we seeded in an annual rye just in that very first season. So since then, in the basically 3.5 years since then, a lot has been growing from that seed bank. And it's been really interesting to see. I just want to point out a few things here. Plenty of things that need to be managed, invasive or undesirable, like barnyard grass. A lot of our volunteers know that one. That's an annual invasive grass that just takes, it's opportunistic. It takes advantage of open soil. So as long as you do timed cutting, if you're mowing it and cutting it down before it goes to seed, you've managed it for the next season. Potentilla anserina, or silverweed, is a beautiful native species that we see all around in the West Meadow, in particular near kind of the side of the garden shed. And that, whenever you see silverweed, that is indicative of wet soil. So the plants are telling us what's growing down there in a lot of ways. We have peach-leafed, a couple of different willows growing, but in particular peach-leafed willow, which you may know about, that is one of the earliest flowering species that a lot of our early pollinators take advantage of. So we wanted to kind of preserve those if we could. We have what John Delisle termed an aster disaster, lovingly. We have lots of different asters growing down there, but a really fun one is heath aster, tiny little white flowers, covered in tiny little white flowers. It's a joy to see. Tall coreopsis in the East Meadow is another one. And a favorite, very interesting goldenrod called Euthania graminifolia. That is a grass-leafed goldenrod that is really, really interesting and subtle and really pretty, already growing down there. So we know we're headed in the right track. And of course, lots of sedges and rushes, etc. So all along as well in the process, Pete Oudolf had always wanted to do a boardwalk at Oudolf Garden Detroit. We just weren't sure when the time would be right. And when we started on the Meadows project, the time was right. So Herb Family Foundation stepped up and worked with us on a grant and helped fund the beautiful wood boardwalk that we put in. So this is an overhead shot of the design and measuring, etc. on that one. And you can see how in this particular season, there's lots and lots of standing water in the wet meadow. So we want to be able to walk through on a boardwalk and be elevated. In April last year, you can see the contractor, this is their construction zone, and they're putting in the footings, etc. And here's an overhead shot of the boardwalk, almost complete in early May last year, with still lots of standing water. So this habitat that we're working on here, this wet, heavy clay environment in Southeast Michigan, where did we look for sort of research and inspiration? And the predominant landform is so interesting. It's called Lake Plain Wet Prairie. You can find lots of information about Lake Plain Prairie. There's multiple types of Lake Plain Prairie in Michigan on MSU's website from their horticulture program. It's very fascinating. That was the original way that Wayne County and much of our shoreline in Southeast Michigan originally appeared. I can only imagine what that must have looked like. And essentially means, in super short explanation, that with glacial movement, layers of sand, silt, and clay were deposited on top of each other in multiple layers. So we have soils that and seed bank, we have changing conditions, basically going wet, dry, and plants need to be able to handle that changing condition with whatever's being thrown at them. So essentially, Lake Plain Wet Prairie forms what is the perfect rain garden plant palette. So think of all the species that you may have in the rain garden, and all around the Midwest, the Northeast, those plants come from here. They thrived in our habitat originally of Lake Plain Wet Prairie. So I just did some research and finding some inspiration photos. This is from a prairie in the Midwest in Wisconsin. We see the beautiful rattlesnake master, Eryngium yuccifolium, blazing star, some lovely tall grasses, including big blue stem, maybe some silphium, some probably rudbeckias, lots of different plants in there that we're familiar with thriving. And then on even taking it a little wetter from those species, we have, of course, cardinal flower. I saw that was someone's favorite native plant. Beautiful cardinal flower bone set in the background here. Joe pieweed, we're so excited. This is the first time we've been able to have Joe pieweed here at Oudolf Garden Detroit. Some really pretty sedges and rushes in the foreground going to seed there. Another shot of a wetter environment. Looks like a blue flag iris, whether it's Iris virginiana or Iris versicolor. Gorgeous different sedges and rushes, and you can see these darker green fine, that's a juncus type of rush that are very, very common in our region, very beautiful. And we can see lots of standing water in this picture. So we're sort of imagining, what kind of plant palette, what are we going to see in the future? As well, we have a couple of local inspirations. The work that Detroit Audubon, now Detroit Bird Alliance, has been doing under their Detroit Bird City program. They've been transforming underused city parks around Detroit into native flowering meadows. They're not necessarily all a wetter environment like ours, but it's been very inspiring to see what they have done with Callahan Park, which is now mature prairie, Palmer Park, portions of Palmer Park, the Joe Louis Greenway, and many, many more. So I encourage you to seek out, do a little research, find those parks on their website and go see them in mid-late summer. They're absolutely stunning. And the birds, the bird habitat that they've created is just amazing. And then Shannon and Susan and I visited this incredible park in Canada, just over the bridge or tunnel into Canada in Windsor. Ojibwe Prairie Complex is an amazing place to visit. I highly encourage everyone to go in late July or well into August for best prairie viewing. It's a huge nature preserve. They have tall grass prairie, oak savanna, and much, much, much more. So check out Ojibwe when you can. And again, with this wetter environment that we're dealing with, well, first of all, MichiganFlora.net is University of Michigan, their herbarium. This is their research site. All kinds of information about Michigan native plants that you can just completely nerd out on plant information. It's a lot of fun to spend time on Michigan Flora. And in particular, there's a measure called the coefficient of wetness that botanists and other scientists use just to basically describe, using this simple numerical coefficient of wetness, how much water can plants handle. If they have a coefficient of wetness of, say, -5, they almost always occur in wetlands under natural conditions. That would be the obligate wetland type species. If they can handle a little bit shallower water for less period of time, they might be in the facultative wetland, et cetera. So that coefficient of wetness is very important if you are looking at rehabilitating some wet land that you have on your property. And originally, I spoke about our early seeding of sedges and rushes. The design team, Pete and Shannon and Susan, did a lot of research about what sedges and rushes, well, what did we have coming up already, but then what did we want to add that would be native in this environment? And they really looked at, I'm just showing you a screenshot here of the quite the array of what they looked at. And, they're organized and highlighted by color. We're looking at, basically we were wanting to have shorter to medium species so that we could have a clear view over a lot of them. We didn't want them to be super tall. We wanted to have some fine and medium textured species along with some of the coarser, wet, big rushes. So we looked at, they were very much organized by short, medium, and tall. We only picked a couple of tall species to add to the seed mix. So a lot of research went into this, and there's such a huge palette of native sedges and rushes that are perfect for this habitat. And think of it as the understory, the ground layer under the flowering plants, under and amongst the flowering plants. So we did, and they're also organized by sort of the general seed mix that's going everywhere. And then we're overseeding the dry areas with select species that do better in the dry environment so that we'll have something with whatever Mother Nature throws at it. And then a wet area overseed mix as well. And all of our plants in the native meadows, all of it, all this information is available on our website. So don't worry. You can always look at the sedges later. And I just love this graphic because it's so confusing to tell what is a sedge versus a grass versus a rush for most of us who aren't plant scientists. Sedges have edges on the left. They are basically triangular at the base of the stem, and they're solid when cross-sectioned. Rushes are round, but they are also solid, filled with like a spongy pith, it's called. So juncus, the juncus genus, and others as well. And then grasses are hollow. There's other sayings to help you remember it, but that's the one we're sticking with tonight. There is a trick, three-square bulrush is a trick one that confuses the heck out of people because it's basically triangular, but I think it's probably maybe round at the base. So this is from Mount Cuba Center, a native plant botanical garden out east in, I believe, Delaware. And they did a wonderful sedge trial and have tons of information about sedges for home gardens. So just a couple of sedges, just to see the huge variety. Here we have Carex stricta on the left, the darker green, really fine, not super tall, and this beautiful Carex squarosa on the right with those cool sort of orbity looking seed heads that are forming. And then our plant palette, one of the first things we also looked at was shrubs or woody species for structure and habitat. It's a very large space, especially the East Meadow. So we want to have, over time, we want to have shrubs. We don't necessarily have trees down there, but we want to have shrubs that form sort of a backbone and give your eye a place to pause. They're wonderful for birds, insects, pollinators, etc. This is buttonbush, this really cool wetland species, Cephalanthus occidentalis. Several other shrubs in the East Meadow. Remember, the East Meadow is much larger. So we were going with a larger number of different species in the East Meadow in general. Aronia, our native chokeberry, spicebush, sambucus, and a couple of viburnums. And then we have two native dogwoods in the East Meadow. This is Cornus fomina, or gray dogwood, or I think it has multiple other names, swamp dogwood, silky dogwood. That's why I think it's great to use Latin, because it's so confusing. So beautiful flowers in spring, and then so important to have those berries in fall, that food source for birds as they're migrating. The Detroit River and the eastern side of the state where we are, major migratory bird path. So we're always thinking about birds too. And of course we have red twig dogwood, Cornus sericea, in the East Meadow. Another beauty, swamp rose, Rosa palustris, in hip and in flower here. Can't wait to see those starting to grow. In the West Meadow, our shrubs, a smaller palette. We have beautiful Michigan holly, Ilex verticillata. We have prairie rose, which is like a climber style rose. And again, the native chokeberry with those really cool berries on the right. So again, with hydrology, as we're researching plants, and over time, over at least 3 years, we were gathering those that drone footage and looking at what was the water doing over all that period of time, compiling that data and layering it on top of each other. And in the end, this is what we pulled together: 3 different planting zones. Remember that coefficient of wetness for our plants that we can easily research online and organize our plants that way. So we ended up with the purple being the wettest area, the obligate wet areas. And Mapping Solutions, Duncan and Sean did lots of awesome calculations with determining our square footage, how much, which totally tells us how many plants we need. how are we filling the space with very specific detailed information. So the purple is the wettest area. The red is our facultative wetland, our sort of medium, definitely wet in spring and possibly in late fall, but definitely tends to dry out, but still has that heavy clay, tends to be wetter soil, holding water even when the surface is dry. And then the yellow area, our upland area at the top, all along the top. And the area between the stairs to the Peace Carillon, the bell tower, is kind of raised as well. So again, from that site survey, they know how high is that land, how much is it drying. So this is how this mapping formed. How are we organizing our plant palettes for planting? So I don't have time tonight, unfortunately, to go into all of the flowering species, which are, it's a pretty awesome mix here, but everything is on the website. I just wanted to share, here's a glimpse at the West Meadow flowering species list and all of the thought and data and information that went into it. So again, organized by, here's purple, that wettest zone, the obligate wet, possibly 10 centimeters of water depth is not unheard of for that area. So plants need to be able to be a good 4 or 5 inches underwater for weeks on end if necessary. So we have several species here, many that will be familiar to our native plant enthusiasts. And then we also have notes from Shannon in particular over here on the right, like that swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, is a good knitter between obligate areas and facultative areas. It can handle a range of, like water levels fluctuating. So, so all of the notes really informed as we started out with a much longer plant list and we wanted to simplify it so it didn't, when visitors come and experience the meadows, it was something you could take in and really enjoy and wasn't a crazy mix, overwhelming number of plants, or, we also are thinking about plant success over time. So we do have one fern in the wettest area. That's a marsh fern, Telepteris palustris. And let's see, the facultative wetland area, that medium wet zone, the green highlights indicate grasses, perennial grasses that we will be adding at a later date. Grasses these grasses in our palette tend to be pretty aggressive. So we wanted to give the flowering species a couple of years to establish themselves before big blue stem, different grasses come into the mix and get and start pushing and fighting for space down there. So several of the species that we were all talking about in our chat earlier.
Keep going.
If we could please mute yourself. Thank you. Again, the full plant list with beautiful images is on the website. This is just a sampling of many of the beautiful plants that are in the wet meadows. So, here's that euthymia, that grass leaf goldenrod down here in the bottom area. We have a tall, beautiful ironweed, of course, Culver's root, Verbena hastata, the boneset, that wonderful Eryngium yuccifolium rattlesnake master, Euphorbia correlata, flowering spurge in the lower left. That is a drier area, like in the upland portion. That's where that one's going. So we hope that it does well. So I hope you enjoy looking at the native plants and all the information on the website. And so here we are up to 2024, and it's planting time after all that planning. So it was very exciting in early June when the wild type van pulled up, and they had every square inch of that van filled with plants on multiple layers. It was truly impressive. So it takes a village to do a planting project like this. And we had Many fantastic volunteers helping out. Unloading plants and keeping them organized is so important. So that was a lot of work. We actually had in early June last year, we had a little heat wave. So it was like upper 80s, almost 90 that day. Here we can see all of the, we're keeping our plant plugs organized by species, and we have them labeled. I think the labels are just with a single flag on the other side perhaps, but we're keeping them very organized, and that's super important in a big project like this as you're getting ready to do a planting. The team from Feral Flora in Ann Arbor, they helped us out with just the first planting and making sure that we were getting set up for success and that we could handle all of those plants coming in and being planted all at once in the most efficient manner. So one of the ways on a large project like this, a restoration project type of thing, is you get all of your native plants in plug form. You know, they're very healthy young plants, and you want to get them in the ground as quickly as possible. So we had a team of, I think, 3 different augers going, pre-drilling holes, basically walking all around in the East Meadow on that first day and drilling holes in the ground. So we can see from above here, you can almost, if you kind of look, you can see all of the dark holes. And we were not planting the obligate wetland first. So that's why there's no holes drilled in that area we can see here for the most part. We were moving a few shrubs, so there were a few things. There was a little bit of work going on in there. But basically, you pre-drill as much as you can, because then our volunteers could continue to come in the shifts throughout the day and get right to planting. And Matt, owner of Feral Flora, helping us with layout as well. We did not do Pete's typical layout maps. We wanted the wet meadows to be it's just sort of naturally laid out. We had some general grouping principles to keep the really, really tall species further away from the boardwalk and think about where we're placing shrubs and framing views. But basically, it was a group effort between myself and Richard and Matt and a couple other folks helping with layout, and we would walk around and drop the plug right next to the planting hole that we wanted to have planted there. Everything was watered well that earlier in the day so that they can go straight in the ground and they're already wet. And then fantastic volunteers showing up and just jumping right in and planting. When you're planting plugs, it's pretty easy. We were just using hori-hori knives. And the difficult thing can be the clay soil, how it's just so sticky, moist and sticky. But everyone had a great time working hard out there, and we got it done. So sort of a 2024 recap, 15,000 native plants and shrubs we planted last year, 162 volunteers helping with that planting. Our grower partners primarily were Feral Flora out of Ann Arbor and Wild Type Native Plants out of Mason, Michigan. And there were just a couple of species that for one reason or another, neither of them could or wanted to grow, that I was able to source from a couple of specialty nurseries in the upper Midwest. Blazing Star is in Minnesota, and Pizzo is a large native plant nursery in northern Illinois. So they filled in the gaps. And then we capped off the year last year with just an awesome celebration in October, dedicating the native meadows to our dear friend, Jean Hudson. And Jean, basically, she's been a member of the ground crew since the very beginning. She conceived the idea to ask Pete Oudolf if he would come and work on a garden in Detroit. So we thought it was so fitting. And this is John Erb from the Erb Family Foundation, and they are opening the boardwalk officially. So that was a super joyful day after having the meadows planted and the boardwalk open. So one of the absolute joys of doing this work is seeing the biodiversity return. I mean, they never left, but they are definitely returning in great numbers because I sort of feel like if you build it, they will come. So I just wanted to share some of the fun friends in the garden that we see quite regularly. Song sparrows are probably on the left our most constant companion throughout the summer. They are all over the garden. They've been nesting in the rain garden and in the main garden in the Vernonia. I think it's in the clethra shrubs in the rain garden. And they're just wonderful. They stand there and sing across the garden to each other and don't seem to be very afraid of us. And then with our adding the bird border on the west side of the garden, immediately birds were coming to enjoy, in this case, the serviceberry fruits. What a thrill. That was fabulous. Of course, we leave the garden plants, the entire garden, up all fall and winter long. And this is exactly why we don't cut back the Echinacea pallida, because here this goldfinch is already, colors are already changing as the season is changing into fall, enjoying a great meal down up there in the main beds. This is a beautiful palm warbler. Remember, we have this incredible migratory bird path passing right through. Lots and lots of shorebirds. It's always so much fun to see the herons, egrets, etc. We do have lots of turtles and baby turtles, and so we're always a little bit worried that they're grabbing our baby turtles. But wonderful to see them. This is a Scutellaria incana skullcap, native skullcap that's up in the main beds, one of my favorite plants in the main beds, and just a pollinator magnet, as many of the plants are. Lots and lots of monarchs, especially later in the season. We're finding that we're seeing them more a little bit later in the season. And then I had the pleasure of seeing Joseph Ferraro yesterday, who's an amazing macro photographer. And he likes to come and shoot at the Oudolf garden, and he was shooting last fall in the native meadows. And so this big guy here is the caterpillar of the hooded owlet moth. And I was doing some research. I'm pretty darn sure this is one of the goldenrods. I mean, color obvious, but also the leaves. And really cool to see, like, you don't always see them. Joseph is down there totally looking for the, like, what's there that we're missing? What an amazing species, who's hanging out on these plants. I love this photo from, looks like also goldenrod, this bold jumping spider, probably a tiny, tiny creature. Who knew that we had 4-eyed little spiders jumping around down there? I think it's absolutely adorable, personally. Joseph is most active on Instagram. If you don't already follow him, check him out, Joseph Ferraro down there. And the 3-lined flower moth, this is, kind of a little caterpillar that you might notice, you might not. It's awfully tiny. And when I was doing a little research after Joseph sent me this picture, one of the host plants, there's a couple of goldenrods, and boneset is one of the host plants. So sure enough, this is boneset. If I'm thinking about the size of one of those buds, that's pretty small, probably an inch or less. And there's so many florets on each plant that it would be pretty hard to notice that. So awesome. I love it. Richard and I kind of have a friendly competition going on iNaturalist. This is a free app if you are a person who likes to find pollinators and look at these fun critters all over the garden. Oudolf Garden Detroit has a project that you can post some of your pictures to and try to, the community helps you identify what they are, who they are. And this is these are some of my discoveries, which I'm very proud of. Last fall we had, probably 8 or 10 buckeye, the gorgeous butterflies hanging out in the meadows on the asters. That was super fun. So care and stewardship over time. I mentioned we're adding our native grasses probably next year into the meadows. Big blue stem, another rye, the Sorghastrum nuttons. So we have a couple other ones that we'll be adding there. That's prairie cordgrass, Sorghastrum nuttons. They're pretty. That's a really tall one. So again, we're doing that later. And grasses are really good fuel for if you're doing controlled burn, which we intend to bring on board in our sort of care regimen. We'll be working with the DNR and talking about starting controlled burn probably a year or two after we add the grasses. And again, we're using selective cutting to control annual invasives until the meadows fills in. So if you're seeing us string trimming or mowing down there in certain areas, it's just because while native plants are young, they can take cutting and without a problem, but it helps us control some of those weedy grasses that are taking advantage of open soil. And we will continue to be very diligent trying to find, identify, and very carefully spot treat Phragmites and purple loosestrife. Unfortunately, the only way to do that is with chemical herbicide by trained professionals. And we're using like a cut and tip or hand swipe method now so that there's no overspray to surrounding plants. For care and stewardship of the meadows and the rest of the garden, we do have bed captain opportunities and other volunteer opportunities, which we will be starting with the first week of May. Bed captains are special volunteers who basically have decided to take on a commitment of on average 4 hours or more per week to come work in the garden, and gives you an opportunity to really learn the plants and the habitat and dive deeper into Pete Oudolf's work at Oudolf Garden Detroit. So I just wanted to share, as I'm wrapping up, some of my favorite resources for work like we've been doing in the native meadows. A couple of my favorite books, just generally speaking. Anything Doug Tallamy does, The Living Landscape is one of several books that he's written and been involved in. This one's with Rick Dark, who is a scientist and gardener out east. This is a wonderful book that I think you would enjoy. The Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants, Neil DeBole and Hillary Cox, is the only book that I know of that has all of our basically prairie plants of the eastern U.S. Organized such that you can see what they look like what a seedling looks like, what a mature plant looks like, what the flowers look like, what the seeds look like. Like every life cycle, there's a photograph to help you understand that plant. And then I mentioned mountcubacenter.org. If you're considering adding wanting to learn more about sedges, including lawn replacement options, check out Mount Cuba Center and go to their plant trials. They've trialed many different native plant categories. I was just looking at an echinacea study that they completed recently, but it's a fantastic resource. Homegrown National Park, the website, of course, Doug Tallamy's work is totally inspirational and incredible. The organization Wild Ones started here in the Midwest, and they're totally dedicated to native plants and stewardship. Wonderful organization. We have several chapters in Southeast Michigan. Keep Growing Detroit is my local, very hyper-local favorite place to buy native plants here in Detroit. Their farm is right near Eastern Market, and you can go to their website or email them and ask to see what they're growing. They have quite a long list of native plants that they are growing. They sell them at market, but you can also order directly and pick them up at the farm. MichiganFlora.net, again, from University of Michigan. And then a couple of other regional native plant companies that are doing great work. PrairieNursery.com, that's Neil DeBole's company. They're in northern Wisconsin, and then Prairie Moon is in Minnesota. And even if you don't necessarily want to buy plants from them, the research, the information available on their site, and lots of free native plant design schemes for home gardens, it's a wonderful resource. And you can order plants and have them shipped. And I just want to thank our professional photography and drone imagery partners. This is Ryan Southern. So many of his images in this presentation allow us to be able to share out of Garden Detroit. He takes plant portraits. He does so much for us. We were shooting a sunrise shoot a couple years ago in early summer together. And Chuck Milligan, Unmanned Aerial Solutions, Chuck does a lot of that drone photography, our drone photography for us, where we're documenting and keeping track for our technology purposes. And of course, thank you to all of you, our volunteers. This photo is actually a couple years old, and we're hoping that Pete will be visiting again this year or next, and we can take a new group shot. So with that, thank you so much. We will turn to Richard. Maybe you can turn on your microphone and see if we have questions that we want to address or anything we want to talk about. In the meantime, I'm also interested to hear from any of you. If you'd like to email me, send me a note, send me questions, go on our website to sign up, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Oudolf Garden Detroit. All right, Richard.
We had one question from Suzanne that may be important for others to hear as well, and it was, will the link be will these slides be available to see? And so everyone knows, on the website where you joined the presentation this evening, the link will be there in a couple of days, so you can just click on that and it'll be on YouTube to enjoy and learn from once again. Wonderful presentation, indeed. Meredith. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, and Richard's earlier presentation, in case you missed that, is also available on the same page. Looks like Amy has a question. Were there considerations for water pollution cleaning in the plant selection and placement in the meadows? I don't know that we specifically actually, the Detroit River has been cleaned up considerably in the last couple of decades. In fact, the last 2 days, I've seen more walleye fishing going on than ever. And definitely that is a function of what these plants do. They do clean water. That's what wetlands do. Improve, they take time, they absorb all of that water before it immediately runs right off into the lake or into the river. But that's a great question. I just don't think we had we didn't particularly have pollution to worry ourselves about, but it's definitely a function. Richard, anything else we want to address before we say goodnight?
Some comments that Barbara, thanks you for a terrific presentation and all of your knowledge and dedication, which is true for all of us. Thank you for voicing that, Barbara. And Julie Semrock says, today was the first perfect day for my first walk on the beautiful boardwalk. Enjoyed the early spring blooms.
Oh.
So, yeah, thank
That's
you,
awesome
everyone.
To hear.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Sylvia asked, are there deer and rabbits? No rabbits, and I don't know why exactly we have no rabbits. Probably enough predators for rabbits. Richard, do you want to talk about deer?
We have deer for sure. The deer continue to take what's left of the tulips, and this year they graze off all of the crocus. I think the moles are working on our daffodils, but other than that, those are our main predators. We are getting some help from our winged friends. We've watched red-tailed hawk catch moles in the garden. We were all working on the cutback in the rain garden when a marsh hawk flew by at shoulder level, also hunting moles. Kestrels also doing the same.
Kestrels, that's awesome.
If you're lucky and you're
Yeah.
there, they're looking, and we do garden to make it easier for them to catch the voles too. We'll explain that more to you when you sign up to volunteer.
There you go. There you go. Suzanne asked about the predators. I think for the rabbits in particular, there are fox and coyote on the island. Probably those are the main ones, keeping those at bay. Did I miss anybody for rabbits? I think those are the main ones, keeping the rabbits
Yeah,
at
no,
bay.
that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
few
Lots of flying predators for sure. Yeah. With others. Alexander said there's a
Alexander's
tuxedo
bringing up.
cat around. Yeah. Yes, there's all kinds of critters on Belle Isle. It's a lot of fun, including the human variety. With that, I think we're done. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you'll join us as a volunteer, or that we'll see you in the garden and talk soon, everyone. Thank you.